Well, thank you everybody for joining us today. Welcome to the first of the fall 2022 semester's speaker series. Our guest today is Tim Runde. I'll give a little a little summary of what he does. But at the same time, today's event is co-hosted by with the U.S. Green Building Council Central California chapter, and we have the executive director with us, Laura Gromes. If you want to say a few words, and then I'll go and present Tim. Okay.
Wonderful. Yeah, thank you so much, AJ, for collaborating with us again. It's always wonderful to work together. I'm the executive director of the U.S. Green Building Council, Central California. We are a 501c3 located here in Fresno with projects around the Central Valley. We are focused on education, networking, and project management in the green communities and green building field. We've had another webinar this week focused on what can be done if we build amazing green buildings. And of course, always the money question is coming up. So I look forward to hearing from Tim what all these great improvements of high-performing buildings do to the cost and the evaluation afterwards of the building sector.
Thank you, Laura. And of course, I didn't introduce myself. I'm AJ. I'm the director of the Gazarian Real Estate Center at Fresno State. And well, one of the things we do is actually bring in speakers like Tim, who give us information about, anything related to real estate, right? And so let me go ahead and give a little short bio for of Tim Runde. So he is the president of Runde Partners, a full-service real estate appraisal and consulting company that is headquartered in San Francisco, California. He's got a beautiful view back there if you see in his office. He has over 30 years of commercial real estate appraisal experience, encompassing a wide range of property types, including commercial, office, industrial, retail, and multifamily assignments. He also does a lot of other types of work. He received a Master's of Science in Real Estate Appraisal and an Investment Analysis degree from the University of Wisconsin. And one of the things that I also would like to mention is that he has his own textbook, The Valuation of Green Commercial Real Estate with the Appraisal Institute. And I'm sure he's going to talk about that as well. So let me pass it on to Tim. Thank you again, Tim, for agreeing to present to our people. We really appreciate your being here with us. Thank you.
Well, thanks very much for that nice introduction, and thanks for asking me to speak. I always enjoy reaching out and sharing my experience, sort of boots on the ground experience. I've been at this for 30 some years, almost all of it in the Bay Area, focused in San Francisco. I got interested in the green space, I guess sometime after the Great Recession, I would say, and published my first paper on it in 2010. We did the textbook in 2017. So a little bit more about my background. I think the reason I saw this as an interesting area and an area that would be of growing import is my undergraduate was in zoology. It had nothing to do with real estate. And that's, you learn about ecosystems and you understand that ecosystems are finite. They have carrying capacities. And so when the concerns over climate change and global warming were starting to be raised, and looking at the impact on the environment of the built environment, that resonated with me. And I thought, there's going to be something, there's going to be a there here. Whether green buildings are worth more or less, there's going to be change here, and we want to stay on top of that. So that's kind of where I went. So I'm going to jump in here after that little background and share my screen quickly. It's going to take just 1 second to get the slideshow set up properly. Okay, gotta swap this out here. All right, hopefully everyone can see the slide. So I thought what we talk about today are kind of these four areas: the Inflation Reduction Act, the solar PV landscape, net zero energy, and the buzzword of the moment, ESG, and how green building fits into that. And it plays a very, very important role, as we'll see. First of all, the Inflation Reduction Act. This was originally the Build Back Better plan. It couldn't get anywhere. Joe Manchin was a holdout. They finally co-opted him by, instead of having any kind of taxes or penalties on fossil fuels, they said, okay, fine, if we'll allow you to continue that for the time being. Kind of made a deal. But this is a groundbreaking piece of legislation as far as effect on the climate change. It was just passed. $369 billion of money for primarily, a lot of it going into climate change related improvements, and a lot of it in the built environment, targeting a 40% reduction in greenhouse gases by 2030, which is a pretty substantial impact. The real estate focus is primarily use of the existing investment tax credit and rebates that are administered at the state level. This is going to push a lot of money into the green space, primarily energy reduction, greenhouse gas reduction, cleaning up the built environment to run on electricity that we can then, and also generate electricity. So there's a couple of different areas: energy efficiency upgrades, 30% tax credit. This or up to $1,200 per year for energy efficiency upgrades, and you can get it in multiple years, so you can do it more than just once. Oops, sorry about that. There's big $2,000 up to $2,000 for heat pumps, heat pump water heaters, etc. There's also state administered rebates, which are subject to, I think, are going to be subject to income limits, is the understanding, and that's, I think, to be determined by the states. 10-year sunset on this. So residential solar, the ITC was at 26% in 2022. It was stepping down by 4% for residential, and was going to go to zero. That's been reinstated for 10 years. It also applies to other on-site generation sources, renewable generation sources. And it will step down after 2033, or in 2033, to ultimately to zero if it's not renewed again. So that's going to push money into solar. Importantly, it also applies to commercial solar, and there's some pretty significant bonuses for commercial solar that has 40% of domestic components. You get an extra 10%, so that's a 40% tax credit. Low-income housing and community solar, if it's installed on a low-income housing or community solar project, there's another 20%. So that's 50% of the cost is a tax credit, dollar for dollar reduction right back at the end of the year. Now, it's another couple of important elements. The investment tax credit is transferable. So you can actually, if you don't have the tax liability as of 2023, you can sell that to somebody else, give it to somebody else who has that. And there's a direct payment option for nonprofits. So they don't have to partner up with a profit-making, somebody that has a tax liability. They'll actually be able to do it. So I think we're going to see a lot of the issues in the Inflation Reduction Act were focused on moving, trying to help lower the lower portion of the income strata with going green. And so a lot of these things have limitations or encouragement in that direction. Importantly, it also includes energy storage, batteries. Before the Inflation Reduction Act, storage had to be paired with the solar and powered 75% of the time for 5 years. Starting in 2023, it applies to all storage. It doesn't matter if it's connected to solar PV or not. So you don't have to get solar PV. You can just put batteries in your home and get 30% tax credit. A couple of other things that are buried in there: $500 million using the Defense Production Act is allocated to heat pump manufacturing and critical minerals processing. Critical minerals, obviously, for batteries. Heat pump manufacturing, because that's to get rid of the gas furnaces and the oil furnaces for heating. You're going to need to make those more efficient and lower costs. So I think that's important. And they didn't forget the ag sector. The ag sector has been getting a pass on its climate change impact, primarily because it's so important to generate food, I think, and it's kind of a sensitive area, but they got $20 billion, 20 billion, that's with a B, for climate smart ag practices. I think that's going to motivate some methane reduction processes and better practices in the ag sector. I'm glad they included that as well. So this is a big deal. It's this is coming on top of the Infrastructure Act, which is pushing money into infrastructure as well. This is, I think, going to have a positive impact on the environment. I think it's also going to help with the cost of a lot of energy efficiency related and solar generation, renewable energy generation cost. The certainty to that, extending that tax credit for another 10 years is going to help stabilize this and help deployment. So, which brings up the solar PV landscape. Boy, things are, they go every which direction with solar PV. And so let's just talk about where we're at. Electricity price trends. Why do we care about that? Because, electricity is the avoided cost. If you don't have to buy electricity from the grid, then it's money in your pocket. That's how we value it in the real estate appraisal world, at least one way. We're going to talk about cost trends because that's the other way you look at it, is what does it cost? And finally, there's the whole connection between the grid and the PV, which is net energy metering. And what's happening there in California is going to have major impacts going forward. All right, first of all, no surprise here, California is a huge state. It typically ranks first or second in installations of solar PV. It is the largest solar PV market in the country. Not a big surprise here. Part of that has to do with our cost of electricity. And if you looked at your bill recently, this probably looks like you wish you were paying 20 cents a kilowatt hour. It's actually a lot higher than that when you add in whether it's time of use issues or the various charges. But nonetheless, relative to other areas, this is an expensive place to use electricity. As we move to the electrification of everything, this is going to be huge. Grid resilience is going to be huge. And we're going to see, we all saw that by 2035, you won't be able to buy an internal combustion engine vehicle in California. So the race is on. Another interesting headline, I don't want to talk too much about electrical vehicles. That was also, those rebates were also in the Inflation Reduction Act. Those are going to create a big load on the grid. People have to charge those at some point, and we're going to have to figure out a way to pair that up with the peak generation of the renewables so that we're not overloading the grid at critical points. So California is an expensive place to buy electricity and to operate. It's also growing really quickly. This is the 5-year growth, total growth, almost 60%. That's like 10% a year. And it's going to get worse probably, or at least it's going to be probably, my guess is it's going to be something like that. The rate case that PG&E puts in front of the CPUC every 4 years, they're including the cost to underground the major transmission lines in high-risk fire areas after their disastrous history with starting wildfires. That's going to come out of the ratepayers. They're going to have to raise rates. So we're all going to be paying a lot more electricity. This is all going to make it so much more important that you are as efficient as possible, because everything is going to go electric in the future. It's going to be harder and harder to use natural gas, or I think they're going to outlaw natural gas furnaces at some point in the future. And so when your furnace wears out, you're going to have to replace it with a heat pump, electric heat pump. That's going to kick up your energy bills, and people are this is going to be a pinch. So the other side of the equation is what's the cost trend been on solar PV? Well, everybody knows it's been dropping like a rock. Over the past 10 years, it's gone down about 2/3 from about $7 or $8 a watt on a residential system to down by $3. This is over to down near $3 a watt or so. That's the fully installed cost. And a lot of that has to do with the reduction in the solar panels themselves, most of which are built in China. Those of you that have followed this know that there's been, there's two things. One, there was a tariff imposed for during the Trump administration under the anti-dumping law. And secondly, there is a case, a domestic installer is now suing the Chinese manufacturers they're alleging that the Chinese manufacturers have simply set up shop in other Southeast Asian countries like Vietnam, South Korea, things like that, and are actually manufacturing Chinese panels, just not in China. And we'll see what happens there. If they put tariffs on those, that's going to kick up the cost. We have seen a bump up in the pricing over the last couple of years. Part of that's pandemic influence. Part of it is the tariffs, I think, or the import tariffs. But I think the long trail of downward cost trending is probably going to be stabilizing going forward, and we'll have to see. Most of the cost, as you can see, most of the cost increase, if you look at the two bars on the left side, between the first quarter 21 and 22 is due to the panel. The light blue is the cost of the actual module. Most of the other costs have not changed a whole lot. Interesting to see, though, how small a portion of the total cost of solar the actual modules are, particularly for residential, because it's such a small operation. It's not very efficient to do those one at a time. When you get to the utility size over on the right, the scale there is much more efficient. All right, so we've got cost of electricity is going up. Cost of panels has come down but stabilizing. The whole mechanism for this that made this all work economically was net energy metering, and that's available in something like 42 states around the country. What that means is basically your meter spins backwards. It literally spins backwards. When you're over-generating based on your use, you send it back to the grid, and it basically deducts. You're selling back at the same price you would be buying at that point. One-to-one reimbursement. That was a good deal. It helped solar when it was $8 a watt. Seemed like a better deal when it was $6 a watt. It was $4. Getting down to $3 a watt, the question was, do we really need that anymore? And the argument, I'm sure many of you have followed this. There's a social equity one that generally this was benefiting people who were in the upper income classes and not in the lower income classes. And that there was not, and the other argument was that the grid services, the services provided by the grid, which allowed people to avoid having to buy storage for use when the solar was not generating adequate electricity, those services were not being reimbursed. So net energy metering 2.0 came in around 2018, maintained the one-to-one reimbursement for the most part. It put a sunset on, I think, a 20-year sunset on your net energy metering, that you could, in other words, you could hold on to that one for the 20 years from the time you put it into service. And then after that, you have to flip to whatever tariff, whatever rate scale is available for net energy metering at that time. They also added grid service charges, fixed charges, to pay for the service of sending electricity back to the grid. All right, so pending as of the beginning of this year is net energy metering 3.0, and this came out and it was issued as a ready to go decision, and it was supposed to be adopted within weeks, and it has been sitting there for 9-10 months now, and I think it will not actually be implemented in its original fashion, but it's anybody's guess. I don't have the inside track. This would have a significant impact on the value premise of solar PV, particularly for residential, as an income or a reduction in your utility cost, your electricity cost. Originally, you were buying at 30 cents and selling at 30 cents in a one-to-one situation. Net energy metering 3.0 would replace that with, when you need electricity, you buy it at the current rate, say it's 30 cents, but you can only sell at the wholesale rate, say 3 cents a kilowatt hour. That one analysis I saw said that will knock the value of residential solar by something like 75%. It's not quite as onerous or arduous for the commercial, but anyway, we'll see. It also increased the grid charge, service charge, the monthly charge to something like $50 or $60, which is actually pretty substantial. And I think maybe a little bit over what is necessary, but we'll have to see. And finally, it reduced the grandfathered term for existing customers who were under the prior net energy metering tariffs. So it was proposed to go from 20 years to 15 years. So that's a lot of kind of bad news. Now that comes on, and then that's been sitting there. I remember, I don't know if it was politically, if it just got too much pushback from industry or what, but I'm not sure what will happen with it. But I found it interesting that after that went on ice, we get the Inflation Reduction Act, which on a federal level has got all these huge subsidies for at least the installation of solar and energy efficiency. So we'll have to see. So lots of moving parts here in the solar PV world. We'll see what happens. I think it's good that there's stability with the 30% tax credit. The one thing net energy metering 3.0 is trying to do is encourage people to put battery storage in their system. I think that is a good thing because I think that's good for grid resilience. It's just a better, you could, it's good to have that with your system as well as be connected with the grid. It gives you, as I said, resilience. All this is subject to, whatever the powers that be decide, but we'll have to stay tuned and see. So that brings us to the topic that we were apparently was talked about earlier this week, net zero energy homes. And I think this is a big important area. It's kind of moved from this proof of concept issue where could you do it and how much would it cost to can we just make this the new normal? And I think we're getting to that point. And I want to go over an example here. This is a real life example of an existing home in something called the Dream Creek subdivision. It's a Habitat for Humanity project. Those of you that are familiar with that organization know that this is built with volunteer labor. And you don't buy these houses, you pay for them with your sweat equity. Essentially, you work on a certain number of hours, and then you have the opportunity to get one of these homes. These are modest homes. These are actually the homes that we need to be building a lot more of, not just in California, but in the country. This is what was built at the early part of the 20th century, 1,200 square foot kind of bungalows, single story, modest homes, starter homes. Just an article in I think it was the Wall Street Journal yesterday. It was like, there's, nobody's building starter homes anymore. Everything is, $500,000 or more. In California, it's the affordable housing in the Bay Area is $1 million. It's ridiculous. This would have sold for probably $270,000. I think it was completed in 2016. So, this is starter home material here. And this is a net zero energy home. It doesn't look like it. It looks like a conventional house. Let's go through it. Here's a look at one of the homes that was under construction. This is advanced framing techniques for those of you that are familiar with that. Spacing the studs out wider, using 2x6 studs, engineered wood headers, 2 stud corners. Bottom line is 60% less lumber. That's good. Lower, because lumber's back to pre-pandemic pricing, but as we all know, lumber went through the roof during the pandemic in terms of the cost. The framing factor, the amount of the exterior devoted to the framing was about half to a third what you'd see in a typical building. Instead of a slab, they used a controlled vent crawl space, tight envelope, lots of insulation, heavy duty insulation, pre-drilled electric runs. That's pretty clever. So normally in electric is run along the baseboard about 12 or 16 inches above, whatever the height of your outlets are. What they did here was they simply notched out the 2x4 studs at the bottom and ran the coax or the cable along the base, which made the insulation actually easier to install, faster to install, and better because you don't have to worry about the insulation, working insulation in around the wiring. Very simple things, but can end up having positive impacts overall. Lots of insulation again, limited glazing, Very tight building envelope, 8 air changes per hour, 1.53 at 50 pascals. So that's a very, very tight building envelope. Conventional building would be closer to 5. So if we look at some of the other, mechanicals using a ducted mini split heat pump, they were able to reduce the cooling mechanical load by 75%, heating by 80% with the insulation. They located those in the conditioned space so you don't lose as much energy to leakage and ambient conditions. Used energy recovery ventilators, ducts in the attic were insulated, and by placement of the furnace in the strategically placing the furnace, they reduced the duct run to 50 feet from a typical of 250 feet. Again, duct leakage is all ducts leak, or most ducts leak, and so the more you can reduce them, the more you can reduce the linear feet of ducting, the better. They don't just leak because they're not sealed. A lot of them will. If they're sealed, you can seal them, but they're also, subject to just energy loss through radiation through the actual duct itself. Gas-fired, tankless gas-fired hot water heater. So this is technically, because it's if it's a gas-fired, you got to have a gas connection. So this would not, this isn't technically net zero if you're using some gas for your water heater, but it does generate all the electricity it needs, and the amount of gas used for a tankless water heater is probably not all that significant. They also, where they located it mattered. They put it in the middle of the house, really close to all the to the kitchen, the bathrooms, and the laundry. So you only had 12 feet of piping to the last fixture, which means you're not going to be having a lot of wasted water waiting to get the hot water. All LED lighting, Energy Star appliances, EV circuit in the garage, and an energy management system to control it all. Pretty sophisticated for a little 1,200 square foot bungalow. That reduced the EUI from about 60 to 21, or about 2/3 kBTU per square foot. The net cost came in slightly under. Now this is, approximated cost because they had to impute a labor charge because they didn't actually have contract labor on it. They had people volunteering to do it. So they had to add the hours and put in a market rate for that. But it didn't cost more. And it reduced the solar PV array requirement by 2/3 because they reduced that EUI so much. That's really key. Solar PV is not cheap. It's cheaper than it used to be, but it's not cheap. So that's sort of a little quick run through of what I think is important, an important example of doing this at a modest level, because we can't just roll out green for people that can afford it. And I think that's something everyone on this call understands. It has to be something that's just normal and isn't onerous in cost. And it has to seem like it's just, just like normal, that's the way things are done. Yeah, it's normal for a new home to generate most of its own electricity. That's just normal. So the last topic I want to touch on here, and I want to save some time for questions, is ESG, which is this big overarching concept that's in the news a lot right now. And there's a lot of hand-wringing going on over it. What is it exactly? Well, it's a concept that applies not just to green buildings and the real estate sector, but it definitely involves the real estate sector, because for a couple of reasons we'll look at in a minute. First of all, what is it? First of all, it's this concept that comes out of the idea of sustainability. And essentially, for you economists out there, this is trying to deal with negative externalities of business operations and real estate. So we're looking now what the property does to the environment, to the people that use it, that live near it, instead of just looking at what are the market conditions out there for office. What's the vacancy for, what is the effect of a school system on home values? When we do normal market analysis in real estate, we look at all of the effects that the market has on the property. We don't really spend a lot of time going, well, how does this property actually affect its market? That's the viewpoint that externalities presents, and that's what ESG is all about. It's what are the externalities of an operation, an entity, and that entity can be an office building, a shopping center, a multifamily, a subdivision, whatever. So environmentally, the main things in real estate are energy use, the amount and the type of the fuel. Is it a fossil fuel source? Is it a renewable source? Greenhouse gas emissions. What's the waste stream look like? What kind of materials use do you have? Is it the kind of use that every 10 years all the TIs get ripped out and they have to be completely replaced? Or is it a material that can be easily reused and repurposed? What are some of the things in the social realm? The S in ESG is social. These are the social impacts of an operation or an entity. We looked at the effect of employees of the property on employees, the occupants, the people that shop there, work there, live there, on the community. Things like labor rights come into play, prevailing wage issues, workplace health and wellness and diversity, well and fit well, all the focus on the health and productivity of the employee, their mental and physical well-being. That's the social element. So the environmental element is obviously all those energy, materials use, a lot of the lead areas, and lead does too deal with the social areas, but the well and the fit well are really focused just entirely on drilling down onto, the quality of nutrition available. Do you have access to nature to go walk outside and see something, enjoy biophilic views, etc. And governance, this is more entity level rather than asset level. So when we think about governance in the real estate world, it's a little bit more, it's more asset level. The funds that own a lot of real estate, the REITs, the pension funds and things like that. This is where they kind of come into play. How are they behaving? What are the shareholder rights? What are their practices, etc. So what's driving it all? Why is everyone so excited about ESG all of a sudden? It seems like it's just this buzzword, right? Well, regulatory, there's a couple of major initiatives. Buildings use something like 39% or are responsible for about 39% of global greenhouse gas emissions, right? California has passed the Climate Accountability Act in the Senate. It has not gotten through the House yet. I don't know what will happen with that, but it requires for any company that's over $1 billion in sales that they do full scope 1 through 3 greenhouse gas emissions disclosures. That is a big deal because a lot of companies do business in California. There's also a proposed SEC rule, which has been getting a lot of press. This would also require, with no limits, any listed company, anybody that's publicly traded would have to report on scope 1 and 2, and if material, scope 3 emissions. And for those of you who are not into the scoping, scope 1 is the energy you use. Scope 2 is the emissions from getting the energy to you. And scope 3 is your value chain, which means your upchain suppliers and your downstream customers. So you can imagine the magnitude of reporting that would be incurred for a scope 3 emissions report. That would be pretty significant. And the fund managers are screaming because they think it's going to cost too much. Others are fighting it out, saying it doesn't have anything to do with fiduciary responsibility. That's just do-gooderism. That thinking is still out there, but it's largely been replaced by the thinking that it's not really okay to ignore material risks to your value, to the value of your company or your property, if those could occur, or there's a reason to believe that they could. That sentiment is shifting. It has been for some time now. The majority is starting to look in favor of the fact that this is something material. The other side that's driving ESG is a little bit squishier to look at, but it's sort of more of a social element. We have these values-driven investors, and it's not just the impact investors anymore. We got millennials. 75% of the global workforce will be millennials by 2025. That's a huge number. they're going to inherit something like $30 trillion in the next 2 to 3 decades from their baby boomer parents. They're going to invest that based on values. They're twice as likely to invest based on social or environmental goals of an entity than the average bear investor or bull investor. That's something to keep an eye on, because that money is going to move around. They're going to take it out of their parents, who they think, well, maybe that's not, they inherit the money, they inherit the home, whatever it is. They're going to take that wealth, and some of that's going to be moved, and more of it's going to be moved into things that are, into entities that are addressing, that align with the same values and are addressing their concerns. And let's face it, I'm not a millennial. I'm a trailing edge baby boomer / leading edge Gen Xer. The millennials are going to have to deal with climate change for longer than I will. So it makes sense that they're more concerned, and I'm very concerned about it, right? So anyway, I think that's something worth watching. There's been estimates that ESG investments have been, the movement into that space has been enormous over the last five years. Particularly, it's supposed to on track to hit over $50 trillion by 2025. That's a lot of money. It's a lot of money to be managed, a lot of places to go. Now, what are the other things? Well, risk mitigation is a big one. Something like 80% of commercial real estate investors in a PricewaterhouseCoopers survey saw ESG risk as material. And materiality is a big issue for fiduciaries, because if they can prove it's not material, they don't have to really pay much attention to it. But if it's material, then they got to do something about it. The two areas of, we all know physical damage from more severe storms. That's one issue. We've seen it with Ian in Florida right now. Every season we got hurricane season, right? But that's one part of the world. The bigger one, I think, for real estate, and the broader one that's going to be more insidious, let's say, is transition risk. What's called transition risk. That is the risk of getting to deal with a low carbon economy. Can your property operate here, or has it become obsolete? This is obsolescence, what we call the Brown discount. So the business case, obviously, this has been put out there: best in class, reduce your operating expense, employee retention, value enhancement, protection. The one study I have seen on value of companies that reported the GRESB, the Global Real Estate Benchmark, about their environmental behaviors, ESG behaviors, was that those companies did not necessarily do better on a current return basis, but they outperformed on an asset appreciation basis. So over time, they grew it, and that kind of makes sense. This is a more long-term focus, ESG. And superior returns, but as I said, currently superior returns are not necessarily in the near term, unless it's from reduced operating expenses. Trying to find a rent premium for green building is very, very difficult. But you do see things like better marketability, better tenant retention. All those things tend to protect on the backside, the reversion. And obviously, you don't want to be the last building that nobody wants, right? You don't want to be the obsolete property. All right. So this is from an ESG report. These call them sustainability reports. Now they're ESG reports. From Nuveen. Nuveen is the asset manager for TIAA, the big teaching educators pension fund. They have something like 117 billion, is something like that, assets under management. A lot of real estate, just in the U.S., and they're a global investor. But I thought this was really interesting. This came out of their current report. Chris McGibbon, their global head of real estate, it says two things. There was a shift in thinking and what the investors care about. Engaging with investors over the last 12 months, we detected two significant shifts in their expectations of their investment managers, which is what Nuveen is. First, to meet their fiduciary duty, investors expect material environmental, social, and governance factors to be embedded in investment processes and portfolios. So it's now you have to do it as part of your fiduciary duty. That's the first thing. And secondly, they expect managers to share their values on key issues such as climate change and human rights. This is counter to the argument that all that matters to the investor is profit, and that's the only thing you should care about as a fiduciary. This, I think, is a significant shift that we're seeing right now. It's happening right now in the world. And later on in their report, and I didn't pick them out for any particular reason, except that I think they did a good job of articulating this, but they put this transition risk and physical risk into a grid, which, as an appraiser, I love grids. We always think in grids. A 4-box system here. The upper right hand is what happens if you don't do enough and we don't meet our climate goals. You have a disorderly transition, which is a high risk, and a significant physical risk. If you do the opposite, if we actually do things right and in an orderly fashion, we have a very low transition risk, low risk of obsolescence, and low risk of physical damage. And you can see the other two boxes as well. So it's clear that there's this physical risk here. This is a map. This is it's new to me anyway, from FEMA. They go down to census tract level to measure the physical, the risks of damage in particular markets by dollar amount and et cetera, a variety of things. And then they measure the community's ability to respond to it from natural hazards. And they've got 18 natural hazards, everything from hurricanes, floods, fires, you name it. And you can compare different counties or census tracts and figure out where is the risk. I think this is the direction we're going. There's other companies like MCSI that will sell you rating systems that tell you what the risk is, both the physical risk. This is just physical risk, but some of these will also tell you where they see transition risk being highest for assets. Now, one thing I will say about this is that this is based on physical damage from natural hazards, and it does not incorporate any projection of the effects of climate change. It's based on historical performance in these market areas. But as we see the damage from these storms and natural events increasing and weather changing, that's creating different types of damage, the insurance, the people that insure these and own these assets are looking for places where they can actually find, what is my exposure? And I think that's the big question where we're at right now is, do I have an exposure? How bad is it? Because there's people saying, oh, forget it, it's all being overblown. We just, it's just those do-gooders, the greenies. And then there's other people saying, we're about to go off a cliff. But I think this kind of tool is a good place to start in starting to assess, where do you own, where are your assets located and what kind of risks do you face, right? So lastly, just touching on resilience, this is from, I think, Harvey in 2017. That is, it can recover, but Florida, some of Florida is underwater right now. Resilience is a topic related to ESG, related to green building, and it's related to sustainability. They're not the same thing, but resilience is a really important concept that you want to harden yourself against the future. And when you have a future that you don't understand because it's never been that way before, because the climate is changing and we can't do anything about it, and you've got this combination of assets that you cannot be relocated because they're affixed to the land, you've got a problem. So this is why some of the resilience strategies we see, green infrastructure is a very simple one, but a very effective one. We're going to see more and more of that. We see microgrids where you can isolate from the entire community or an operation from the entire grid. We see battery storage coming online. We're going to see a lot more of that be very, very important in the future. So with that, here's the book. If you want to get the book, I think this is a good resource. It came out in 2017, but it's held up well. We teach courses with it at the Appraisal Institute. I just got done teaching it last week virtually. And it's a good resource for kind of the current thinking on green valuation topics. There's another residential one that's focused on residential and how to actually deal with that if you're working in the residential space. So with that, here's my contact information. If you want to reach out to me or you've got questions, I'm happy to talk about this stuff anytime. With that, I'm going to stop sharing and open the floor to questions, or AJ, however you want to handle it at this point.
Yeah, let's just go ahead with questions. If you can either post them on the chat or unmute and ask them directly, that's fine. Any questions? Well, let me just ask with one, and this is also related to you. How can people here in the room go about and get to, take a course with you, or get more information, more specific on real estate valuation for commercial, just get more training? How can they find you, or what do you do for that?
You can happy to reach out to me. The one place I would recommend you look to is the Appraisal Institute website, and just check their education. The Appraisal Institute does a very good job of education for appraisers, practicing appraisers in continuing education, but also qualifying education. And there's a series of there's 4 courses actually that focus on green. One's on residential, one's on solar, and there's an introductory one, and then there's one that focuses just on commercial green valuation. And those are solid courses. They're offered both, periodically. The schedule is on the Institute website, and I would recommend it. That's pretty much the what I follow. The other things that that not so green valuation focused, but just green focused, are obviously the USGBC education resources. There's a lot there as well. This First Friday webinar series that they've been running is really great. It's very topical, and I enjoy it. They do it the first Friday of every month, and it's on various topics. I think ESG might be coming up on one of them. Those are the resources that I use and that are available that I can recommend.
Thank you. Dave, go ahead and ask your question.
Sure, thanks. So I have a question related to valuation, and maybe it's more of a question or an issue on the residential side than the commercial side, where I think there may be more recognition for things like the value of lead certification relative to different assets. But when you talk to appraisers a lot of time on residential valuation, you'll often hear that they either devalue or they don't consider a lot of green features, including things like solar, because either they're not comfortable quantifying future savings from efficiency or renewable type of things, or they don't see it necessarily in the comps, and they're not, they don't consider that as part of, a necessary component of finding a comparable property in the neighborhood, or there isn't a comparable property that had those features that sold, so they can't add it.
Yeah, that problem persists everywhere in real estate. And I will tell you, in appraisal, the world is, we look in the rear view mirror. We have to wait for market evidence, and then then we have to try to do it. So it's a challenge, and it's very easy to. The other side of it, though, is it's very easy to overlook green features. That little bungalow, I mean, you see the solar panels, but who knows that it's got that kind of insulation, or that it's, unless you dig into it, that it can operate with peanuts for a utility bill, right? That has got to have a material impact. And we've been doing it the best job we can of getting appraisers up to speed on these factors, but it is a challenge sometimes to find the data to support it. And as a result, we have to sometimes look to different tools, like valuing the contributory value of the solar based on its avoided cost of electricity. And we've taught those classes and things like that. So it's a continuing challenge. The more comfortable, the more it's out there, the more comfortable people will get with it. And the appraisers have to deal with their underwriters that are going to question these things, and some of them are. It's a whole sort of value chain of people that have to buy into this. So it's a recurring challenge. I guarantee I don't have a good answer for it. We're just trying to do the best we can with educating everybody.
Great, thanks.
The other thing I would say is that's one of the places where the labels come into play as well, is that it, whether it's Build It Green, LEED, et cetera, these different certifications do have some recognition, and you can start to the market can start to see that. There's another one called Pearl certification out there. And yeah, I think what we'll start to see is people will have some recognition that this means something better than just the average home, you know, so.
Thank you, Dave, for your question. Very good. I was actually thinking of the same question because I've done some research on that, and yeah, it's kind of interesting. I wanted to also mention, so we have now mandatory requirements for solar panels in new residential construction, and so I was wondering if you foresee that as a requirement in the future for commercial as well. So I know that they probably haven't done that because it would have probably a great my guess is that it'll have lots of opposition from the industry, but is that something that, you know, eventually all new commercial construction will require, you know, solar panel installations?
Yeah, I think that was the plan, was that by 2030 they were going to institute that for commercial, if I recall, for new commercial.
Yeah.
Now that's gonna be easier to attain in our lower density suburban environment. In your dense urban, you know, the Bay Area, you know, certainly in San Francisco, there's no way to, you know, to power a building with solar. There's just not enough real estate, not enough roof space. So they'll have to have some workarounds for community solar, or, you know, where you buy it from a solar farm somewhere else. But yes, as far as I know, those are on the books and will are planned to go into effect. That brings up another important point that kind of muddies the water from a market comparable perspective, is when the thresholds, the green building codes that go into effect, Cal Green, the Title 24 high efficiency codes, they're baking in green into everything. So everything that's new. So where it becomes important is understanding that when you're doing your appraisal, that a brand new building is going to be operating at a far more efficient level than an old building that hasn't been renovated. And if if all new homes have to have some level of solar on them, then that's just a code built home. Now green is the standard. So it becomes an issue of, rather than looking at some sort of premium for green, it becomes, well, it's the Brown discount issue, right? So how much is it going to cost to get us up to speed here? And is it even possible? Is it financially feasible? Is it physically possible to actually, upgrade this property? So.
Right.
Anyway, that's where I see a lot of this going, and it becomes an issue of recognizing the particular attributes that the property has, and also looking at the deficiencies that the property has, and understanding, where are you going, and trying to figure out. And sometimes it's not so easy to pull out an explicit adjustment from the market, but you can kind of see, well, this is kind of at the upper end of the range of the comps because it's got these features. This one is not so much, because it lacks them.
Got it. Any more questions?
AJ, there are some questions in the chat.
Oh, okay. Go. Okay.
Where's our chat here? Hold on.
Yeah,
I just read the latest one. Isn't California requiring ongoing continuation education in green building for appraisers?
Okay, that's good.
I wish they were.
Okay.
Not that I'm aware of. No, there's no requirement that California appraisers have to take green education for their license. I think somebody tried to get that instituted, and it came up with against a lot of resistance.
And here, a new one coming in. Most buildings already exist.
Yeah.
Shouldn't the focus be on getting them improved? Where's California's effort on that?
Absolutely. Well, the federal effort is the tax credit and the rebates that they're going to kick out for energy efficient upgrades and things like that. I think that's good. California's upgrade, if you are familiar at all with, I'll just take office because it's a very good example, where every 5, 10, 15 years, you have to do a pretty major redo of tenant improvements, or, you often do. If to conform, what California has done is they've cranked up the building codes every so many years, the Cal Green Title 24, that now you can't replace, you have to basically, to meet the energy requirements, you have to replace your lighting with LEDs. You have to have, motion detector switches on. It's got to be digital controls. You got to use heat pumps. They're doing it by the building code method, and California is really taking a leadership role there. It's very stringent, and it's not cheap. It's not the only reason construction costs and TI costs have gone up dramatically recently, but it is one of the reasons. Now, an important element for appraisers to understand, anyone in the valuation field, is that that's going to have a payoff, whether it's an efficient one and it meets the threshold IRR of the asset manager. I don't know, but you're gonna use less energy, and it's a higher quality environment, most likely. This is one of those examples where the cost shifts from being an operational cost, which is, getting to the architecture thing. When you're trying to hit a budget, you got to value engineer out all the stuff that's more expensive than you thought it was. So oftentimes you end up putting in stuff that's cheaper up front, but might be higher cost operationally or have to be replaced more quickly. So sustainability and ESG focus is kind of trying to push that in the other direction and say, no, what we want is something that's going to operate for the next 100 years that this building's going to live, or 60 years, at a better environmental footprint. It'll also be lower cost, and that might entail an upfront cost. Is that popular? No. Upfront cost is always, you're always going to get resistance on that because everybody's price sensitive. So what California's done is really primarily with the building codes is the best example I can think of.
Let me ask you, thank you. Let me ask you one previous question. It says, are owners that were part of the solar PV net energy metering 1 subject to the changes at each new version, or are they grandfathered to stay with the previous version of the program?
Great question. Generally, they're grandfathered, but what they're doing now, the proposal for net energy metering 3, as I understand it, was they were going to shrink that from 20 years down to 15 years from installation. That's still probably a pretty good period of time to recoup your investment, but it's not as good as 20 years. But yeah, that so far they've been doing that. In some other areas, like in Nevada, they tried to revoke that, and they had to backtrack. They tried to pull everybody onto the new net energy metering tariff, and they got a big political backlash over that, so they backed off from that and grandfathered people for a period of time, and which I think is only fair. If you go into it and you got to expect that you're going to have that the rules aren't going to change, the financial rules aren't going to change that you made your decision on, just because somebody decides to change the regulation at whim.
Excellent.
Well, I'm glad to see the AIA is requiring the chat, that they're requiring education. That's very good, and I'm doing everything I can to encourage it, because I think it's really important. We have this thing called walk right by syndrome, and we coined the term because it's just really easy to miss this stuff if you're not paying attention to it, and if you don't understand what's going on with the energy codes or anything else. So yeah, education is really important. So another good reason to have these kinds of presentations as well, AJ. Thanks for inviting me, everybody, and thanks for listening.
Thank you. Well, thank you so much, everybody, for joining us. It's 2 minutes past the hour, and I really appreciate Tim, all your expertise, and well, hopefully everybody got something out of your presentation. I really appreciate it.
I see Carol Laval raised her hand. Carol, do you have the date for the one thing I just want to throw out there is the Appraisal Institute Northern California chapter is having their fall conference coming up in October. Carol, what's the date? Do you know off the top of your head?
Yeah, I do. It's October 21st.
And so, it's virtual again. I wanted to have it in person, but there is a benefit to virtual because you don't have to drive anywhere, let's face it. And there's a lot of exciting topics there. They're always current topics, and they are of a wide variety of things. It's not just green building; it's all kinds of current topics on real estate. And I think the guest speaker is talking on infrastructure investment and infrastructure stuff. So, Carol, do you want to add anything to that, or is that enough?
It's a full day, variety of topics, really topical, good topical material. And the brochure, the description is on the Northern California chapter of the Appraisal Institute website. I can put it in the chat real quick if you'd like.
Why don't you do that? Yeah, if you don't mind doing it, that'd be great. And
the appraisal, the conference, the Appraisal Institute fall conference is always great. We've had students go, especially for the virtual, one, because students can log in. I've been a presenter too with Dr. Curry. We've been, invited to be presenters in the past. So yeah, it's they always have a great lineup of, speakers.
And the virtual one's cheaper too than the in-person one, although you don't get lunch. So
actually, I have to say, I found out I got your information, Tim, from I think it would have been the spring one, we
have a spring conference too.
You were a presenter at the spring one. Yes.
Yeah, a couple of years ago, I think. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So great.
Yeah. All righty.
My apologies. I just put it in the chat. It took me a long time to get it. So that should go right to the description of the program. And yes, you presented at the spring conference. I think it was the last one we were live, 2020 maybe?
Could be.
In Modesto.
I was actually there. I was actually
exactly.
at Modesto.
Yeah.
You guys slid that one in right under the wire.
Right. That was our last live live and in-person event before we went.
Good deal.
COVID, before we shut down. So thank you. Excellent job, Tim. Thank you.
Thanks, Carol.
Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you, everybody. Thanks for joining us today. I really appreciate it. If you have any questions, feel free to contact Tim directly, or you can always email us and we'll get you in contact with Tim as well. Okay. Thank you so much. Have a good weekend.
Thanks,
Thank you, Tim.
Excellent.
Appreciate it. I'll use some bottle of Fresno State wine.
I'll hold you
I'll
to
get
it.
it to you someday. Thanks.